We'll call to order. Welcome to the Bylaw Review Ad Hoc Steering Committee meeting on March the 7th. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll start with the opening prayer. Director Daly.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask you tonight to keep everyone in your prayers that's affected by war worldwide, and in particular for those in Ukraine. So please join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of peace and justice, we pray for the people of Ukraine today. We pray for peace and the laying down of weapons. We pray for all those who fear for tomorrow, that your spirit of comfort would draw near to them. We pray for those with power over war or peace, for wisdom, discernment, and compassion to guide their decisions. Above all, we pray for all your precious children at risk and in fear, that you would hold and protect them. We pray in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Director Daly. We'll go on to approval of the January 19th, 2022 minutes. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? Seeing that there are none, can I have a mover to accept the minutes?
Moved O'Brien.
Moved by Trustee O'Brien. Do we have a seconder?
O'Hearn Charnota.
Trustee O'Hearn Charnota, thank you. Are there any opposed? Seeing that there are none opposed, the motion to approve the minutes carries. We'll go on to review of suggested changes to the bylaw. So what I was thinking we could do, the format we could do for tonight is through a motion of the board 287/21, we directed the parliamentarian to review the bylaws and come up with various recommendations, which he has done and was in a letter that was dated on January the 19th, which we circulated again today. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review it, but if not, my thinking was we can go point by point and then we can have our discussions, come to a consensus. So the consensus obviously is we can accept the recommendations, we can turn the recommendations down, or we can modify it to that works best for us. Then my suggestion would be that we notify Parliamentary Kapoor, then he can start working on the verbiage of how those changes would look in our bylaws. We can bring that to the next meeting. So ideally, I'd like to try and get through all 7 pages if we could tonight. If not, then we can't. Then we would bring those changes to the next meeting where we can look at it, go through the bylaws, bylaw by bylaw, and then come to a consensus on what we want to adopt. I think as he noted, in some areas, I think we need legal advice. There's some things that we seem to do now that we're comfortable doing that he's indicated may not be legal or in accordance with the Ed Act. So I think we would need a legal review on some of those, and I think he points that out. So if that's agreeable to everybody, we can start. I'll take your silence as
sounds good, Chair Murphy.
I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Okay, so I do not have access to the chat box. So in case I have to say something, is it okay if I interject?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'll try and be, we're less formal in these committee meetings, so we'll make whatever accommodations we can for everybody. So if we look at the first area, it's voting and the effect of abstention. So we've had some discussions over several meetings. So basically, he states the procedural bylaw is internally contradictory, stating in some places that abstentions have the same effect as a negative vote, i.e. bylaw 2.9, and in others, abstentions are to be ignored, having no effect on the results, 11.4. So the recommendation, that the board decide whether abstentions are to be ignored, meaning an abstention counts as no vote, and that vote doesn't go towards the total to determine whether it's a majority or 2/3. In other words, whether requirements to adopt the motion are a majority or where specified 2/3. For those trustees who have voted, abstentions are ignored, or those trustees who are present and eligible to vote, which would mean that abstentions have the same effect as a negative vote. So he had some context stating that the standard or default definition in Robert's Rules of Order is Robert's Rule of Order HCDSB parliamentary authority as per 1.3 is the requirement is the former, meaning that Robert's Rules states that abstentions are to count as a non-vote, or extensions are to be ignored. He looked at 4 boards surrounding us: York, Peel, Dufferin, and Hamilton. So 3 of the 4 neighboring boards require a trustee to vote if they are not conflicted. That is, they do not allow a trustee to abstain. The 4th, Hamilton, counts abstentions as having the same effect as a negative vote. I did not find any provision in the Education Act to direct the board. So we have, our bylaws are in conflict, so we need to decide which way we want to handle this, which is either abstentions count as a non-vote, abstentions count as a negative vote. We could do as some of the other boards and say trustees it's mandatory that you have to vote. So we'll open that up to discussion. I see Trustee Guzzo, abstention should count as a negative vote. Does anybody else have any opinion or concerns? Trustee Agnew, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just comment that I believe that the should you choose to abstain, it should be a negative, it should be a non-vote. I don't think it should count towards anything. It should just be negated.
Thank you. Trustee O'Brien?
I would like it to be a negative vote. Now, just to make sure, what do you mean by a non-vote?
So a non-vote, so say for example, so we have 9 trustees. If one person abstains, then we're calculating based on 8, not 9. If it counts as a negative vote, then the calculation would be based on 9, which in effect means that it's a no.
So I would say I would prefer it be a negative vote and we keep the 9 as if that person did say no.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, pseudo chair or chair. What would your chair emeritus? Well, how am I to refer to you?
Chair out of
whatever you like. I'm just trying to interject in. So that's challenging at present. But this bylaw needs to cover situation where a trustee does not vote at all. Because our bylaws presently allow for that to happen. So maybe a person who does not vote at all should be a negative vote too.
Sorry, I'm not following you.
So our bylaws allow trustees not to vote. You cannot force a trustee to vote at present. So this particular bylaw should cover that situation too, in the sense that if a trustee does not vote, it is a negative vote.
Okay, so you think that if a trustee does not vote, it would be the same as saying a no vote, or are you saying that we should force trustees to vote?
No, I'm not saying you should force trustees to vote. Say when you're doing a vote and there are 5 in favor, 3 abstain. The abstain would automatically be a negative vote. But the one person who says, I choose not to participate in this discussion at all. And so we are in a quandary now. Do we take 9 or do we take 8? So the person who says, I'm not voting, so that should be a negative vote.
So I talked to Atul about this. He said a refusal to vote is the exact same as an abstention.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was getting at.
So that is an abstention. Okay, sorry, Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can I just get clarity on the Roberts rules for this particular item about the abstention? That Robert rules say what for an abstention?
I don't, Director Daly has the Roberts rules in front of him. I'm not sure if you can find that. According to Atul, he's indicated that it is a non-vote, but I don't know if we can actually find the verbiage in Robert's rules.
A non-vote meaning that it becomes 8 trustees instead of 9.
Right, yeah.
So I think I would like that it would be a negative vote. If you're taking the consensus around the table.
I haven't yet. I wanted to see we have discussion on it and
yes,
and maybe get an understanding or I'm trying to think of the logic behind both sides of the argument, right? Yeah, thinking out loud, if it counts as a negative vote, it's really just that you obviously you're not in favor, but you don't want to show that. If that's an awkward way of trying to describe something. I'm trying to think versus a non-vote is you don't have an opinion on it, or you may not have enough information on it, or you choose not to engage. I personally like the rule of having to vote myself, but I think that's why we're elected. We're elected to make decisions, and the weight of the decision is carried by the collective. It's not carried by the individual. I know there was people who've had discussions saying, well, you're putting yourself in a legal position if you vote on something. Well, you're not. You don't, unless you're voting against something that is directly in the act or against a directive from the Minister of Education, then you would put yourself in legal jeopardy, and that's joint and several. So it could be all people that voted that way, or just a few. That's just my opinion. We have it on the side. Thank you, Andrea. Maybe we can shrink that down. I don't know if that's possible.
Do you want me to read it out loud?
Oh, if you could, that'd be great. Yeah.
I've taken this from the Roberts Rules of Order website. It's on their FAQ, and I'll try to reduce the font, the size of the font, but it says, do abstention votes count is the question. The phrase abstention votes is an oxymoron, and abstention being a refusal to vote. To abstain means to refrain from voting, and as a consequence, there can be no such thing as an abstention vote. In the usual situation where the rules require either a majority vote or a 2/3 vote, abstentions have absolutely no effect on the outcome of the vote, since what is required is either a majority or 2/3 of the votes cast. On the other hand, if the rules explicitly require a majority or 2/3 of the members present, or a majority or 2/3 of the entire membership, an abstention will have the same effect as a no vote. Even in such a case, however, an abstention is not a vote and is not counted as a vote.
Okay. So then that to me would imply it is the weight we put on it, whether we have to clarify then if it's the majority of the members available to vote or the majority of the members who have voted. Then we would have to clarify that. Yeah, Director Daly?
Just in Roberts under what a majority means. So majority means more than half, and I'm reading from section 44, line 10. It means more than half of the votes cast by persons entitled to vote, excluding blanks or abstentions.
Okay, so that's very specific. It's saying excluding a non-vote or an abstention. No, well, and it's not a non-vote. A blank is not voting. Okay. Trustees, I lost my speakers list. Let me go back up. I think Trustee Carabella, so you asked that question. Was there any other points on that after we've read that you would like to make?
Well, I guess I'm thinking that if someone has come, they should be counted, and the fact that they don't vote is significant in the collection of the final vote count. So I would say that it's out of the people that are present, it should be a majority.
Just to play devil's advocate, what's your opinion? What would you, or your thought on if we said trustees have to vote? Is that something that you would be comfortable with or uncomfortable with?
Yeah, because you can, if you don't want to vote, in a sense, you can abstain, and then we're back to our question: what does abstain, the value of an abstention? But it could be that you don't feel that you have the proper research for giving a yay or a nay vote. So that's how I interpret abstentions.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Ahern-Chernato?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Through you, Trustee Murphy. So I'll take it in a two-part. I believe that we should either vote yay or nay and have no abstentions at all. I know some of the other boards are doing that. But if we did allow the abstention, I think it should be considered a non-vote, not a no vote, but a non-vote. If the individual chooses to abstain, then they are not utilizing a yay or a nay vote. But personally, my opinion, we should not allow abstentions.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just run through everybody and can voice their opinion, and then we'll try and bring it back to define the consensus down a little bit. Trustee Guzzo?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of go on what Trustee Ahern-Chernato said and yourself, if we're going to say that an abstention is an automatic no vote, then there shouldn't be an abstention. It should just be yes and no. It makes absolutely no sense to have an abstention if we default it to a no. So it just makes more sense. I also think that if we do an abstention as a non-vote, we just have to make sure that we change all of the bylaws to be consistent so that it doesn't say the entire membership, because that's what creates confusion, is when we flip-flop back and forth within the rules. So
yes, yeah, that's kind of why Mr. Kapoor came up with this format, because he said there's several areas. So instead of going, if you went point by point, you might miss it. And this way you can go back and change them all if you need to.
Yeah, so my comment would be, if we're going to keep abstention, then it's a non-vote. If we're going to default abstention to no, then get rid of abstention.
Okay. Trustee O'Brien. So Trustee O'Brien, you agree with which point?
Well, I am glad that Trustee Guzzo said that. I've longed for someone to say that. I would love to get rid of the abstention. And I agree with what you said, Mr. Chair, that we are elected to vote. And it's our duty to be informed, to do the research. When we come to the table, it's in favor or against. And I would love to see that with no abstentions. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Trustee Agnew.
I would say the same, Mr. Chair. We've been elected to do a job. I agree with Trustee O'Brien. We are typically aware of what's coming to the table. We have the package in front of us. We have time to do the reading and the research. I believe that we're doing our stakeholders a disservice by not voting. So I do think the trustees should have to vote, yay or nay. And in the absence of that, if we do decide to go with abstention, then an abstention should be a non-vote.
Okay. So what we'll do, oh, sorry, Trustee Dewar.
Yeah, so just a clarification here. So our bylaws are very clear about the role of the chair and the role of the chair in being impartial and not voting. The same thing is reflected in Robert's Rules of Order, where it says the chair should be impartial here and vote when required. Okay, so the question here is, does this particular bylaw cover that? And still allow the chair to be neutral?
Good point. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Because this section under Robert's Rule, I don't have it in front of me, is very clear about the definitions of and roles and responsibilities of the chair. The Education Act says the chair may participate. Our bylaws do say that, but now it seems to me that you are forcing, this particular bylaw is forcing the chair to vote too. And in that case, how does the chair show that he's impartial?
Okay, that's good. That's a good point.
Can I comment on that, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Yeah, so I understand what Trustee Duarte is saying, and that we could put some language in there to that effect, but I believe that what we're saying here is that the trustees who are eligible to vote at that time would have to vote yes or no. There is specific wording that does eliminate the need for the chair to vote, and I think that Robert's Rules definitely protects that piece. So I understand the concern he's brought forward. I think we could address that should we decide to go that way. But I think in this situation, the chair would be absolved of that responsibility because they do have that ability to not vote as outlined. I think this is applicable for those trustees who are sitting around the table who are called on to vote. They need to make a vote. Yeah, I think that the wording in Robert's Rules would cover off on what Trustee Duarte is commenting on with respect to the role of the chair in voting. This isn't forcing the chair to vote.
Yes, yeah, I have Atul's conducting another meeting, so he mentioned to me that I could text him, and if he has a chance, he'll answer. So I just texted him. That's a really interesting, an interesting point. So again, let's play devil's advocate. So if we're looking at changing the bylaw that trustees have to vote, and the chair has to vote, does it change your opinion on changing the bylaw that way?
No.
Yes,
Okay.
it changes my opinion, because I'm very clear about the section under Robert's Rules which say that, and the chair has to be always portrayed as neutral and be neutral.
Yeah. So Atul has just
okay,
texted me back, which is great. He said, I would say no. If you want to make it that, make it explicit. So then the exception would be that all trustees have to vote except the chair. I'm assuming that's how he would write it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, Robert's Rules doesn't say you have to be neutral. Robert's Rules says you have to be neutral in managing the meetings. It doesn't mean that you don't have a vote. It's that you have to be neutral in moderating debate on one side or the other, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't negate your ability to vote. It never has.
Right.
So, Mr. Chair, I did read that section of Robert's Rules, the RNR, the actual section, not the bylaw, and it is very clear how this is to be done. And I know we could take a moment and review. I don't have that in front of me now, but that's what my understanding is, that the chair votes to move the business of the board forward either way if there's a tie. So
yeah. So
that's my opinion.
Yeah, what we can do is I'll come to you, Trustee O'Brien. What we could do, as Mr. Kapoor suggested, just make it explicit that the chair does not have to vote, but all other trustees do. Trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if we do move in the direction of it must be a yes or no vote, might be a good idea to say that if a trustee refuses to vote, then that is a non-vote or a no vote, just in case that situation arises. Just an idea.
Yes, yeah, I think that would be, yeah, if you say I don't want to vote, then that's a no vote, right? That's what it would be. I would assume that Mr. Kapoor would have to work out the verbiage for us.
I would make sure it's in writing. And so.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a good point. That's a very valid point. Trustee Agnew, I see you're typing.
I'm good. I think I was just going to ask is how we settle this. So are we going to, I mean, I know ideally we want consensus on this matter, but in the absence of consensus, are we just going to take the recommendation one way or the other to a vote of who's at the meeting this evening?
Yes, yeah, I think that's the only way. So,
Okay.
so because, you know, again, we're not necessarily making a decision. What we're doing is we're giving Mr. Kapoor the direction to come up with the verbiage. We're
Correct.
then going to bring that to a meeting where we're going to go over everything. So there will be a second, once we see what it looks like, for example, Trustee O'Brien's point, if it comes back, the verbiage comes back, but it's ambiguous as to what it means if you say, no, I refuse to vote, then we need to change that and we need to discuss it. So really it would be, this really is to evaluate what the recommendations for Mr. Kapoor, to give him direction to provide us with verbiage. Then we're going to have 1 or 2 meetings to go over in details, and really that would be the vote, you know, where we would make the recommendations afterwards to the board. But we still need to give him some kind of direction here tonight. It doesn't mean it won't be different,
Sure.
or we can't make changes at the next meeting.
Right. So on this point, just to clarify, sorry, Mr. Chair. So then on this point, as an example, it would be that depending on how we agree or how it goes on this particular point, that's what we would send to a tool. So if we decided that everyone has to vote, nobody has to vote, abstentions, no, whatever we decide with the majority, that would be the direction we would give a tool on this particular point.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Then he would send back his recommendation. When we get to those specific points within our bylaw, we would then have that discussion further, right? Trustee Carabello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My power just went out as well, but I'm connected, thankfully, reconnected. Right, so we're still saying that if you're a trustee and you decide not to vote at a meeting, like not even abstain and not even vote, if I understood Trustee Agnew was saying that would equal a no vote. So in effect, I think we've gone
No,
around.
that wasn't me. Sorry.
No,
Trustee
okay.
No.
Trustee
Thank
O'Brien.
I would say non-vote.
Okay.
That was me.
Okay. Could be the power went out. So yeah, I think I'm still thinking that an abstention should be a non-vote. Anyways, I'm glad we'll have time.
Should be a no vote, right?
Yes, but I'm glad we're going to still have time to reflect on
Oh, yeah,
it.
no, absolutely. Yeah, we'll absolutely have time. So Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta?
Thank you. And my 2 cents or 25 cents these days with the price of gas. I would say if a trustee refuses to vote at all, then at that point, they're not discharging their duties as a trustee, and it should be as if they were in the meeting during that vote. It should not even be counted. So we go from 9 to 8 to 7.
Yeah, that's another wrinkle. Yeah, I think the other boards are clear. It's a yes or a no, and if you don't give an answer, then it's a no, and then it goes to, then that counts towards the total, right? I think they're getting away from that ambiguity of what is the value or importance. What is, let me phrase it a different way. What is the influence of not voting? I think most boards take the view that your lack of making a decision shouldn't influence the vote, and the best way to do that is not to count it, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'd say if someone refuses to vote, it shouldn't be counted one way or the other.
Yeah, so that
individual should be taken out of that entire vote, because you can't just assume it's a no.
Yeah.
Right.
So then
that's a vote.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep cutting you off. I forget that you have the floor and I should shut up. So that's kind of the Robert's Rules way of looking at it, right? Is that that if you are not going to vote, then you shouldn't have an impact on the vote, which means that you're not counted. It's like you weren't even there, right? So then we would then go back more to allowing abstentions and then the abstention not counting. That's, if I'm taking a temperature of the room, that's what it seems like. If anybody sees it different, maybe you can let me know, and then I can run through and ask, and then we can go get our feedback to a tool and he can bring it for the next meeting. So does that sound like where we're heading, is that we will allow abstentions, but the abstentions won't count?
No.
Trustee Murphy, no, can I just summarize? Like, I don't think abstentions, there should be such a thing as an abstention as a choice. And if someone doesn't want to vote, they're not counted. So if we have 9 trustees and 1 trustee will not vote, we only have 8 trustees during that particular vote in regards to whatever subject that is. That's my summary.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, but then we're in essence allowing abstentions, right? So we're right back to you can abstain, but it just doesn't count.
No, I think there isn't an abstention. You vote, you vote yes or you vote no. End of story. That's it. You vote yes or you vote no.
Okay. So, but as Trustee O'Hearn-Jordan, unless I misunderstood, her point was then if somebody says they're not going to, regardless of that, they're not going to vote, then that vote gets removed from the total.
Right.
Right. But then that's an abstention.
No, it's not.
No, because you have to choose to say the words I abstain.
Exactly.
In this scenario, you're not choosing that word because that word is not.
I don't think that's accurate. If you look at the way the wording the Roberts rule was, they said a blank, right? A blank or a no, or a non-vote. So a no response is considered an abstention. Do we have that, Director Daly? I think it was the one that you read.
And not
So
to
then
be
if that's the
but if we
case-
don't have an abstention in our bylaws a choice, then I don't know how we could have a no response being an abstention if we don't even have it as an option.
Well, you don't. It's a no. A no response is a no.
It shouldn't be a no, though. I think it should be a non-vote. Like to Trustee O'Hearn-Zornata's point, if we have to go with this phantom abstention because there's a yes or a no, and if you don't vote at all, it doesn't count, that's a non-vote. And not a no vote, it's a non-vote. You are absent from the counting, you're absent from, you have no vote whatsoever in that, and it counts as a non-vote, not a no vote, right? Because to her point, if you don't vote, how do you know they were going to vote yes or no? It's got to be a non-vote.
Well, then we're saying we allow abstentions because a no vote, a non-vote is the same thing. It's an abstention. So then we're back to either it's a no vote or we don't, or it's a non-vote.
I think what I'm hearing is that they want, like, ideally, there should be no option to say yes or no, or to say abstain or non-vote. And if you so choose to say you don't want to say yes, you don't want to say no, then remove yourself from the meeting, essentially. It's kind of the way I'm hearing it.
Yeah, but that won't chicken or the egg. I don't think you can do that though.
So can we limit it? And here's a question: can we limit that abstentions can only be done for voting, and they can't be done for agenda or approving minutes?
I think we can write them whatever way we choose, right? It's not according to the Education Act. It's according to what's recognized as acceptable rules of engagement, and we defer to Robert's rules, but we can write our bylaws any way we want to write them. Director Daly,
I was just going to say that Roberts does allow for abstentions, so it does allow for it. And I'm just looking at one of the other boards that's referenced in the one of the boards that Atul took a look at, and I just looked up the language. Every trustee present, including the chair, but excluding those who have declared an interest, a conflict of interest, shall vote or abstain
Yes, so,
on all questions on which the trustee is entitled to vote at the board or committee. So that's one way that our board has interpreted it.
so you shall vote or abstain is allowing an abstention. How do you calculate the vote then? Does it go further to say that, how they do it?
Right. The issue is defining what that abstention means. Is it a non-vote or a no vote?
Yes, yeah, that's the critical point. I don't think any of us are really debating, you know, we have our personal feelings about you should be able to declare, but I don't think that's the key point. The key point is what's the impact, right? I think. Trustee Agnew, I see you typing.
I'm good. I was gonna put my hand up, but I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Dort?
Mr. Chair, does Robert talk about a non-vote, no vote? It talks about abstentions. It talks about yay vote and nay vote. Does it talk about? It talks about abstentions. Does it talk about a no vote?
Yeah, it talks about a blank. It says a blank.
What does it say about blank?
Director Daly.
Well, just in the one section here, and maybe I'd have to see if it's referred to in other sections. And this is under majority vote, the basic requirement. It means more than half the votes cast by persons entitled to vote, excluding blanks or abstentions at a regular or properly called meeting.
So I interpret that I interpret that as a blank is a non-response of refusing to vote, or an abstention is refusing to vote is not calculated in the total.
Is the word blank defined somewhere there? What do you mean by that? It's not very clear.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We can check to see if it is.
It's all on the wording.
It's like the chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
So the goal is at the next meeting to have a tool present at it. So if there's anything in, you know, say for example, if we're having some difficulty with this one, we can always push that to that next meeting, and he would be more prepared to be able to give us that direct advice.
I think that's good. We can do our research too.
Okay. Do you want to do that? Do you want to? So to summarize, basically, we're really trying to determine as a board what influence do we want non-votes or abstentions to have on the results. So maybe if you can think about it in those terms, and then we'll get a tool. We'll definitely have him at our next meeting. Maybe I can even get him to clarify some of these questions that we talked about, which will help us prepare. Is everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll go on to in-camera meetings. Yeah. So this is the one. Sorry.
Is it possible for it to be put on the screen so we can kind of, like, I'm not sure if you're going by on tools recommendations or even just the bylaws,
Yes.
so we can see it if you don't
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, I'm going by a tools recommendations. I'm following that document. If you could, yeah, that'd be great. If you could take that large face off the screen would be even better.
The shine is just throwing me off a little bit.
The camera adds 10 pounds. I have 6 cameras on me right now. Okay, so we're in camera meetings. Yeah, this one I've got a little bit of difficulty with, but we can have discussion. And this one, I don't know if maybe need to get a legal opinion on it. I am informed that the Act does not allow the board, as the board, to meet in camera, except for meetings related to the Ombudsman. Rather, only committees are allowed to meet in camera, including a committee of the whole. So that's an important point right there, committee of the whole. See section 207, particularly 207, 2, and 3 of the Act. Recommendation that the definition of in camera in 2.12 be revised to align with the Act. As noted, that 2.12 lists the acquisition of or disposal of property as a subject matter which can be appropriately discussed in camera, but I don't find it in the Act. The second recommendation, that 4.3.1, which refers to in-camera meetings of the board, be verified and ensure that it is in compliance with the Act. Please note that the edits in the housekeeping portion of this report to clarify that it applies only to the regular meetings of the board. Recommendation that 4.3.8, which refers to in-camera meetings of the board, be verified, ensures compliant with the Act. So that would be getting a lawyer to verify those points. That 4.3.7, breach of the code of conduct and or fiduciary obligations be removed from the in-camera meeting section of the bylaw and have its own section. See separate section of this letter for the recommendations. Note that in the final section of these recommendations are several housekeeping changes to section 4 in camera, including edits to 4.3.1, 4.3.2, and the revision to 4.3.6 to add language to exclude the director when appropriate. For example, Dufferin Peel's bylaw states the director/secretary is entitled to attend in-camera meetings except if the subject matter of the in-camera meeting or committee of the whole is directly related to the performance of the director, in which case the director is not entitled to attend. So the way I interpret this is in the Education Act is stating that the only way that we can meet as a group is the committee of the whole. Now, when we do meet in our in-camera meetings currently, we are committee of the whole because everybody is, all the trustees are there. The only nuance is then that would be a separate meeting. It would be a meeting of the committee of the whole. And we would, again, we could only discuss those items that are specified in the Act. Whereas previously when we've had discussions, it came up and it was determined that the in-camera meeting and the regular board meeting are the same meeting. They're just different portions of the meeting. So it's a bit of a nuance. I think maybe Director Daly, you could let me know. Most boards do it the way we do it now with an in-camera, and they handle those types of things. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't. To my mind, what needs to be cleaned up in this area, and Atul's noted it, and I think we noted it when we first looked at this way back when. The matters that can be considered in camera are very clearly outlined in the Act. And the wording in our current bylaws was off a little bit. There's essentially, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. I would say that to me, that section could stay. We just have to be clear that the 5 items, I would just take them verbatim from the Act and place them in that section.
Which I think he's done that. So the other document that was sent was with the red indications. That's a tools cleaning up, housekeeping for the most part. There's, I think, 1 or 2 other changes that aren't housekeeping, but for the most part there. Trustee Dort?
So my understanding is that the recommendation being put forth now is that the in-camera meeting is a committee of the whole. Is that correct?
Correct. So again, my understanding, the way a tool has looked at it, to be compliant with the Education Act, we would have to call the current in-camera meetings we have a committee of the whole.
So that is a problem now because the committee of the whole does not make a decision, and we do make decisions in camera, and we take votes on those motions for financial obligations and land. We make decisions. The committee of the whole cannot make a decision which is binding to the board. So you cannot call that a committee of the board. It is the board that makes a decision.
Yeah, right. So then what would have to happen is that the action item would have to come to the board to be voted on during the regular board meeting. And obviously it would be, you know, redacted. Those key points would have to be redacted. So that's my understanding of how it would have to work, which, you know, most of the time it's okay. Where it concerns me is when we're talking about land purchases or other things where anybody who, you know, before we enter into a contract would be able to know what our intentions are, and that could impact the price, right? Or other sensitive matters. So I find this challenging to, you know, I think ideally what we'll do is to get everybody's opinion, and I think really this one we kind of need legal advice on.
Mr. Chair. So I'd be careful, Mr. Chair, about bringing a motion out in camera to vote. Then you're opening up for discussion. And
oh no, I agree. I that's why I said I have difficulty with this one. I think it's challenging. Yeah. Trustee O'Brien.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, can you just scroll back to the beginning of that section where he says, "I have been told," or "I've been informed." Right there.
Yeah.
I'm informed the act. I'm not sure who informed it. I've gone through the act, and I don't find it says that. Matter of fact, it says a meeting of a board or a committee of a board, including a committee of the whole, shall be closed to the public when. So I'm just reading this out of the act. I'm not sure where that comes from, but again, that's right out of the act. A meeting of a board or a committee of the board, including a committee of the whole.
Okay.
And that goes on. So I'm not sure where that stipulation comes from. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's challenging, and the reality is our understanding is that the way we currently do it is the way that most boards do it. So then maybe what we should do on this one is there is a few changes, housekeeping changes, which we'll probably review next meeting anyway, that have been. So in this one, we can go back to a tool and get some clarity, and then potentially if his position stays the same, is maybe we take it for a legal opinion. Does that make sense, Director Daly?
It does. I think perhaps where the confusion is whether or not the interpretation is a committee of the whole board and a board meeting are different things. I would argue a board meeting is a committee of the whole. Therefore, a board meeting can have an in-camera session, or the board can go in camera because it's a committee of the whole. They're not separate things. Different boards use that terminology to talk about a particular meeting, but in my mind, they're the same thing.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Yes. Mr. Chair,
just to make that clear, it does say a meeting of a board or a committee of a board. It does say that, just so you know.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's how we'll handle this one. We'll go back to a tool. We'll discuss it, bringing up our concerns of a radical, really it's a radical change to what we do now, right? Which concerns us. And then if he provides his clarification as to, and he maintains that position, then I think we would have to look at getting legal advice on that. Trustee Carabello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to say that when we have our policy meetings, which are committees of the whole, there have been moments when we do require to go into in-camera, and then we go out of it because of the topic. So there we are using that option.
Yeah, the only thing is though that decision's not binding on the board, right? Whereas these
Oh.
decisions we would make would be.
Yes,
That would,
correct.
that
Thank
would be
you.
the challenge. Okay. Okay, that's good. That's how we'll handle that. Meetings of the board and the agenda. This is an interesting one. I don't know if you remember back to the training session we had early on with I forget the trainer's name now. How is her last name? Getting old is terrible, people. Take my advice, don't get old. Anyway, part of one of the ideas that she put forward was that when there's things that either have been well discussed in policy or they're not to say housekeeping type of decisions, they can be grouped all together on a consent agenda. So the recommendation is that a consent agenda be added as part of the order of business. The consent agenda would routinely include approval of the minutes and resolutions re absentees. The decision to place other items on the consent agenda would be made when the agenda is prepared by the chair, vice chair, and director. The aim would be to include items that are expected to engender little or no debate, items that were dealt with in policy, for example. So I think, that's a bit of a judgment, right, is to say, okay, these three policies we reviewed, there was little discussion, the assumption is that they're going to pass, so you would then put it on. So the goal is to improve the efficiency of the meeting by dealing with, in one vote and without debate, multiple routine or non-controversial matters. Any one member who wishes to debate an item on the consent agenda may require that that item be removed and placed in its usual position on the agenda. Another recommendation that the language be explicit that the action cannot be based on staff reports or information reports at the same meeting as they are presented. This applies to, and there's the different bylaws. Recommendation that the language of 9.7 be clarified to make it clear that the vote to add an item onto the agenda requires a 2/3 or unanimous vote, but the final vote to adopt the agenda requires a majority vote. Yeah, that's a good point. I think we had that discussion just recently. And then a recommendation that the provisions regarding special meeting agendas be segregated and not grouped with the provision of regular meeting agendas. So all those points aren't necessarily related, but so what is the opinion, group's opinion on consent agendas and using them in the future? I don't know where we are on the speakers list, so let's go Trustee Agnew.
Thank you very much. So I will say that I do sit on a number of other boards, but one of the board of directors I sit on, we use consent agendas, and it is absolutely fantastic. We have a number of subcommittees that will bring things there, much like our policy will, so our fundraising committee or our budget committee, things like that will bring. And the time that is saved with a consent agenda is it really is. I can't describe it. You can see how excited I am. It really is a great way of moving the business of the board ahead. And I can see why they're used, and I fully support an adoption of that type of approach. I think it really is something we should take a look at doing.
Okay, Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can see what Trustee Agnew is saying. I can see how it could really move things forward faster, and we do get bogged down in that part of the agenda many times. My one question is this though: if we have policies in there, and I can understand why you want policy in there, because if we do debate it in policy, we vote on it, and it should be a done deal. I agree with that. But if you have 3 policies in there and the consent agenda fails, then do the policies fail?
No, they go back to their regular spot.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
I think, okay, you might want to make that clear.
Yeah, so basically, it's a consensus to agree to group these and vote on them, meaning you would vote the same on all of them. And if not, then they go back into their regular spot. And part of that is the trick, or the beauty of this is not to put things that had vigorous debate on the consent agenda, right?
Okay. So would anything else go back into its spot if the consent agenda failed?
Yeah, everything. So for example, if the consent agenda fails, then everything goes back. We vote on the absentees at the end of the meeting, and all of them take their regular business order of business as according to our bylaws.
Okay, I'll say my opinion on that. I think in theory
Mr. Chair?
it would work. Let me just finish, and I'm done. The history of our board tends to get contentious around this area. There is a caveat there to bring them out, and it can be debated. I don't know if it would move any faster with that there. just my opinion.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. I could see in maybe another board it may move faster, but I'm not sure if it can. Those items can be agenda. If you're going to move the meeting faster if you have that caveat in there. That's my opinion. Thank you.
No, I think that's a valid point. I think we have to keep in mind, though, we're making these changes and decisions for future boards also, right? It's what's that saying that old men plant trees that they'll never sit under the shade. So that's part of what we're doing, is we're setting this up for future boards also. But your point is definitely well taken. Trustee Duarte, I'll come to you after we have Trustee Guzzo, Trustee Carabell, and then I'll come to you. Trustee Guzzo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for clarification sorry, my dogs, of course, always when I go to do something. Sorry, I'm pausing as I'm yelling at them. You don't need to.
Oh, did you say you hit your dogs? Ooh.
There's a squirrel that's running by, so that's shiny thing. Okay, my apologies. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem.
So my question is the consent agenda, so this would be similar to the agenda that's prepared in that we would get the Tuesday before. So essentially we would have the week to see it anyways, right? So ideally it's just really saying if there's any issue with it, we can speak up to it ahead of time, kind of thing. Is that how I see it working?
I think once it's on the consent agenda, yeah, so it would be put on the draft agenda, then it would go on the final agenda, and then at the meeting you could say, okay, for example, item 4.1, I would like to ask a question, so please remove that from the consent agenda. It goes down into action or information or whatever it is, and then we continue on with the rest of the consent agenda. It would be done at the meeting. So by removing one item doesn't negate the consent agenda. That just gets pulled out, and once it's at the appropriate time, then you ask your question about it.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying is we would still have the opportunity to review the agenda ahead of time. So essentially, if we had issue with it, we could raise it in advance, which would actually help us to move the meeting along.
You could, yes, yeah, absolutely, you could, yep. Trustee Carabella.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we had a presentation once about this as well, and I don't know if I think I prefer that we have each policy go through, and I know when they go through quickly with no debate, it goes quickly, and then when debate does come up, it's always valid for a reason. So I think that, as Trustee O'Brien would say, that I think in the end, it's all going to be the same amount of time. And I think this one gives us more freedom and future boards more freedom. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Trustee Duarte?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to think the mechanism. I love the consent agenda part of it. So what's the mechanism, how it's going to work? So it's going to be an order of business called consent, and that's going to be on the agenda. Now, the consent agenda has got some action items and some non-action items. For example, we could have a couple of policies there which are action items, and there could be some staff reports which are not action items at all on that. So now on
I believe it would only be action items. It would only be items that require a vote.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so now the next part of it is how do we get an item out of it? Does one trustee have to say I want it out? To 2 or 3, what's the mechanism to get items? So we could basically land up with no. We could land up with no consent agenda. It could be the same regular meeting.
Yeah, absolutely, you could. Yeah. So any one member who wishes to debate an item or on the consent agenda may require that that item be removed. So yeah, absolutely, you could pick it apart. You could pick the carcass of it apart. But again, it's okay. Is the concept of value, not specifically with us, you know, to be quite frank, a lot of these changes that we're going to make, by the time they get passed and accepted by the board, there's going to be very little benefit to our sitting group, but that doesn't negate our responsibility to make these changes and to put efficiencies in where we think that they'll benefit the board in the future, right? So that's really the debate. The debate is does this in the format of what we do in the business of the school board, would it make sense to have a consent agenda? Would it be of value?
So, Mr. Chair, follow up to that is why do we need a consent agenda then? If we have action items 1 to 10, for example, now, and we as a board say the item number 1, 5, and 8, we can vote together. We don't need a consent agenda.
Oh, you could do that. Yeah, you could do it. You could. The only challenge is that it's not in our bylaws. It's not as an order of business. So then it would be challenged more than likely, or potentially could be challenged. So the issue again becomes, is it good practice? Is it a good business practice to do this? So if you think back to, you know, I think the well debated policies stick in our head, but what about the 5 or 6, you know, two or three meetings ago, we had 5 or 6 policies that were really changing some verbiage. There was next to no questions asked on it. So instead of voting, and everybody seemed to vote the exact same way on each one, in that case, we could have done a consent agenda. Will it work for every meeting? Maybe not. Is it valid to have in the order of business as another tool in our arsenal to try and have efficient meetings? I think it's valid. I think it's a good idea. But you know, that's why we're having this discussion, right? Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta?
Thank you, Trustee Murphy. No, you kind of just said what I was going to say, is that if we have an option of trying to have a more efficient meeting, and let's face it, we all know at the policy meetings what policies will have maybe more discussion than others. When it gets to the board table, I think we can all agree. We know what those are, and I would sure the chair and vice chair would not put it on a consent agenda. But I think we need to do anything, whether it's a small step forward to more efficiency. I think we should definitely give it a shot.
And that's a valid point. It's really up to the people putting the agenda together to put things on the consent agenda that would not be contentious. And if there isn't any that week, then there isn't any. Then we don't have a consent agenda, right? That part of the agenda is blank, right? And we just have our regular. It's just that without putting it in the order of business, I think it makes it a little more challenging for us. Trustee O'Brien?
Question, Trustee Murphy. So a trustee could just have, I won't say the right, but pick anything out they want that they feel needs to be brought out without debate, without emotion, without anything.
Absolutely. The same idea as, you know, when we split items within a motion, right? All it is for one trustee to say they want it done, and if it meets the criteria, it's done. It's not debatable. It doesn't need to be seconded. Yeah, absolutely. Any trustee can pick out an item off the consent agenda.
If that is true, then I would go for it.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Agnew, I see you're typing.
No, not me.
Oh, maybe your cursor's just there. I was
Okay.
trying to get ahead of it. Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I can just go around the table and ask people's opinions if this is something that we want to move to Mr. Kapoor to have him draft some verbiage on consent approval of addition of a consent agenda and adding it to our order of business. Trustee Agnew?
Yes, please.
Trustee Guzzo?
I'm sorry, you cut out there. What am I doing?
I was just going around the table to see if there is interest in having sending this.
Sorry.
Sending this to Parliamentary Kapoor for him to draft some verbiage on possibly adding consent agendas to our bylaws.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Trustee Carabella?
No, thank you.
Trustee O'Brien?
I'm good with it as presented as is.
Okay. Trustee O'Hearn-Trinata?
Yes, please.
And Trustee Duart?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, to consent
And
agenda.
I would be in favor also. Okay, so we'll put a check mark beside that one. The next one we have the language, recommendation that language be explicit that action cannot be taken based on a staff report, information report at the same meeting as they are presented. This applies to 2.13, 2.16, 2.21, 9.5, 9, and 10. So yeah, basically we can look at those, but this would be basically when something is presented and it's moved from the floor, is my understanding. Let's just look at those bylaws to existing bylaws to make sure.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So those bylaws are pointing to the order of business that we have right now and the descriptions of each of the items in the order of business. So in the beginning of the document, the bylaws, it specifies each item. And then our order of business also specifies what can be done and what cannot be done. Since we are a publicly funded board, we need to have enough information to make any decision. So any decisions made at the information section or staff reports are without any research. So we need to have a mechanism, and now bylaws are written in such a way that gives trustees enough time to think about it. So a duly notified motion comes to the board, you follow the process, and you move ahead. That's my opinion. I think it's good. It's a good point.
Okay. So just to clarify, this would be adding language to our bylaws that's explicit that we cannot take action based on a staff report or information report, which limits motions being moved from the floor.
Correct.
Yeah, so we have Trustee O'Brien.
I think Trustee Guzzo was first.
Oh, sorry, Trustee Guzzo.
Thanks, Trustee O'Brien. What happens if there's something of urgency that comes out and that's time sensitive? That's
we would have to suspend the bylaws and get 2/3 of a vote.
So we could suspend the bylaws. But so here's my issue is this would be then changing it, because I know that there was some sort of opinion that, we shouldn't be allowing it currently. But if it's clear already, I'm not sure why we're changing it, because that's how it's been implemented in our meetings.
From my opinion, it isn't clear. I know that Chair Duart had discussions with Mr. Kapoor, and he probably is better to speak to this than I am. So I think there's ambiguity, or at least the way our past practices were to allow motions from the floor. We need to be very explicit and make a decision. Are we allowing them from the floor or are we not? Vice Chair, Chair Duart, did you have more that you could add to that?
Yeah. So it is clear right now, but what we need to do is look at the bylaws as a whole to understand that. We cannot read one particular section. So what Mr. Kapoor is trying to do is make it clear, because everybody does not read the bylaws from the beginning to the end and remember it. We cannot. So what he's trying to do is just clarify. We already have it in place that an action item cannot be moved under information and report section, but it's scattered all over the place under those different bylaws that you see there, those numbers that is provided. So he's trying to bring clarity to say that we cannot do it. That's all he's trying to say.
Okay. So,
Sorry,
yep.
just to clarify that's not, but if that is what he's saying, then he wouldn't need to recommend this if it's already clear. So I don't think it's as clear as Chair Dewart or Trustee Dewart thinks that it is. So I can't support this. Yeah, no. It's, you know, in our 4th year of our 4-year term is we're trying to do, you know, it's been tried to change at the table, and for lack of not trying to argue at the table, I don't think that we should be able to do this.
Okay. Trustee O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear Trustee Guzzo. There are things that come to the table that are of great urgency, and they're still coming to the table. I believe a 2/3 suspension of the bylaws would cover that. I'm kind of leaning towards the default of what Trustee Duarte is saying, is that give any motions that come, we need time to think and reflect and do some of our own research before making the decision. So I would support this.
Okay. Trustee O'Hearn-Chernato.
Thank you. And really, trust me, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but when we get staff reports and information reports, it's in the agenda package before the meeting. So we have all that information. So just to be the advocate on the other side, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this, but we would have the information if we were to move a motion during an action item or a staff report. We have it in the package. So I don't know, a lack of information is the actual reason why we need to stop this practice.
Okay.
Can I clarify?
Yep, sure.
Can I talk about? So yeah, it's a good point, Trustee O'Hearn-Chernato. The only thing is we do not have control over what the motion is going to say. It could be related to the report. It could be something going sideways. So that's the only caution which I have.
Right, with all due respect, Chair, you can allow a motion or not, right? So if it's going sideways, then I would expect for you to be our referee and to not allow that motion, right?
Yeah, good point.
That's tough because it's very prescribed what the chair can allow and can't. It's very limiting what a chair can rule not in order. So that, I think that is a challenge. It's a challenge to be the last, have the chair's ruling to be the last line of defense, because you really don't have a lot of tools that you could use.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just offering up for the group that if we're going to use that we don't have information, we actually do. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about this, to be honest with you, Trustee Murphy.
Yeah, I've had some difficulty with this one too, because I think it's a valid point. What Trustee Duarte says is that we don't know necessarily what the motion is, and so then your only defense would be to defer or to postpone to a time where you could have time to think about it or see other sides of it. And then to me, the issue of urgency is that if it is that urgent, we do have the possibility of suspending the rule. So I've got a bit of challenge with this one also. Trustee Agnew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have the same comment as Trustee O'Hearn-Chernato in that, yes, I mean, you're not going to have all of the information to the point that was brought up previously, but those staff reports and those action items are on the agenda. So if there is a motion that is made out of a result of one of those, you do have the information that is there. And there's a good chance that there was a motion that led up to that action item or that report. So there's been a previous discussion on it. So I do think that we have an opportunity to be prepared for any motions that come forward. I think from my perspective, I don't know that I'd want to go through having to try to add something to the agenda or having to suspend the bylaws, if we could make a clean motion as a result of an item that's come to the table. So I have a problem with the recommendations that have been made here, and I can't support them as they are here right now. I do think it's very limiting, and I don't know that it would be in the best interest. So that's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you. Trustee Carabello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regarding this, yeah, there's pros and cons for both sides. I do appreciate that we have time to reflect. The one thing I really wanted to add is that we get community input, that if we do a motion right away at that meeting, we might not have community input or have at least to let the community be aware of what we're voting on, because some have been very big items, and we received a lot of controversy from that. So I would recommend, if it's, you know, that's an added extra good detail, is that when we make a motion, that there is that when we follow the route of a notice of motion, and then the community can be involved. And my other point I wanted to ask was do other boards have any rules around this particular bylaw?
They do actually. The next one is the notice of motions and motions, and I believe there are limits that some put on. I think one was a notice of motion can't be dealt with for like 3 weeks or something. So I don't have good information to answer that question, but I believe that there are some restrictions at other boards. So I think Trustee Agnew?
Sorry, just one more question, Mr. Chair. I wondered if, and I know we haven't got to the notice of motion part yet, but I wonder if part of the consideration for this could be that rather than placing a motion on the table as a result of an action item or report, that at that time a notice of motion could be made. And I'm wondering, because at that point, obviously we will have missed the opportunity to put a notice of motion on at the beginning of the agenda. We may not know at that point that a notice of motion may be required. So in the absence of the points that have been made here about preparation and letting our stakeholders know and all that kind of thing, could there be an opportunity for us to take a look at a notice of motion being permitted? And then that gives time and all that other process to follow through, but it's come out of a result of an action item or a report that's happened.
Yes, that's a really interesting point. I think we have, I think we need to get a tool's opinion on that one, because then that impacts the agenda, which would have already been approved. But we can put that note. Trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of like Trustee Agnew's idea there. It addresses the urgency, if there is one, and yet it does give us, usually 2 weeks to do our research, get the community feedback that we need. So we're not making a hasty decision. I think that would be a good middle decision. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have consensus to say that we will ask Parliamentary Kapoor to look at putting verbiage together with the caveat that a notice of motion would be appropriate, or we would be able to do it? So then if we can't, for technical reasons, move a notice of motion at that time, then we would revisit this and have that discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
I like the idea of the notice of motion. I like the idea of that, Mr. Chair.
I like it too, but I don't think we'll be able to do it. But we'll see. Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll send that to him. So then we'll move on to the next recommendation, that the language of 9.7 be clarified to make clear that the vote to add an item on the agenda requires a 2/3 or unanimous vote, but that the final vote to adopt the agenda requires a majority vote. So that was basically just once we've gone through and we've made our decision or voted, to add either an information item or an action item based on whether it's 2/3 or unanimous, that then to approve the agenda as amended would only be a majority vote, which is our current practice, but I know we had that debate just recently. Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta? Trustee Duarte?
So one more point over there which he did not mention is that adding an action item is unanimous. So 2/3 vote for adding an information item, and action item is unanimous.
Yeah, I
so
think he
those
just.
checks and balances that. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So he's got a good point there. He's got a good point there to say that it should be a majority, but then I think I like the way it is right now. But it forces people to think. It forces us all to be cautious, and it forces us to follow the path of a notice of motion. So that's my opinion. I like it the way it is now, but open to.
Yeah, I think what this is saying is this is the way we are doing it now, but he's just making it explicit that once we've had that vote, whether it's 2/3 or unanimous based on whatever we're adding, that then to approve the agenda is just a majority, which is our current practice, right?
Yeah. So what is he saying then?
So what he's saying is
we are following this.
Yeah, so what he's saying is we've made our decision, we've had our vote on whether we're adding something or not. So if we are adding it received the correct amount of votes. We are adding it to the agenda. The agenda is now as amended. We don't require 2/3 majority to approve the agenda also. We just require the majority.
But we don't need a 2/3 at present. It's just majority.
No, so
agenda is amended. It's
right. So what he's saying is, if you're
adding,
adding an information item, it's 2/3. If you're adding an action item, it's unanimous. So we as a board have now made that decision. We're adding it to the agenda. We now have to approve the agenda. To approve the agenda as amended is a simple majority or a majority. He's saying we need to make that explicit. It's not explicit now.
Oh.
It's the way we're doing it, but it's not explicit.
Okay. I'm okay with making it explicit.
Okay, we have up next, do we have Trustee O'Hearn or Trustee O'Brien? I think it's Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say, I think this language is important. It just specifies it a little clearer, and that when we're in the throes of a board meeting, it's clear, and I subscribe to KISS, right? Keep it simple, silly. I think this will help us. Yeah,
Good.
That's the word for tonight. Thank you.
Good. Okay, Trustee Carabella.
Thank you. I know that acronym as well, and for me, it's keep it simple, sweetheart. So,
oh, you guys went to a different school than me.
I'm happy with the clarification. I just wanted to ask, because maybe this is the place or not, but sometimes we're adding something as a discussion. So it's not an information item, and it's not a miscellaneous, but it's actually like a discussion item, and that isn't one of the sections of our agenda. So maybe when we get to that part, or I just thought I'd mention it here.
Yeah, that's a good point, because what was it we're missing? Yeah, we're missing in our order of business discussion items. We don't have it, and a couple times lately, we've wanted to add discussion items and we really had nowhere to put it, right? So that's a good point. I'll make a note on the side, discussion items. Yeah, so my understanding would that 2/3 would be required for discussion item. It falls under the information. Trustee O'Brien?
I would like that as well, an area for discussion items with the 2/3, thanks.
Okay. We'll do that. We'll make a note to him. So it sounds like everybody is in agreement on this one. Is there anybody opposed on that one? Doesn't seem like it. Okay. We'll move on to recommendation that the provisions regarding special meeting agendas be segregated and not grouped with the provisions of regular meeting agendas. So I think that's just clarity, I would assume. I don't know if there's much. Do anybody have any questions on that one? I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think we would probably accept that
Mr.
one.
Chair.
Yeah, Trustee Carabell?
Yes, sorry. I was didn't know whether I should spend time typing my hand up or just interjecting. I wanted to say that sometimes our meetings of the past, and I've been looking them up, there's something called an adjourned meeting. And that's something that's not on our bylaws. And an adjourned meeting is when we really just didn't get through the action items of our agenda. And we've been calling a special meeting to get that done. But in looking at Robert's rules, and maybe Atul can look into that and we can discuss it, there's something called an adjourned meeting.
Yes, actually, that's a good point. When in the summer, when we had a lot of special meetings, another parliamentarian contacted me and said, "You're handling special meetings wrong. What you should be doing is just adjourning the meeting. Wherever you stop is where you stop. The next period, when you decide to have your next meeting, you pick up from that point." And I think internally in the parliamentary world, there's debate on that. But that's a good point. I'm going to bring that up and ask for Atul's opinion, and if he could give us some background on that, because in my view, life would be so much easier if we know that we don't finish the business, then that gets added to our next meeting, right?
Just to clarify, I don't think necessarily added to the next meeting, because then we could run into the same issue, but that an adjourned meeting is called that just deals with finishing this meeting, but that we all decide on what day it is. I think if I remember reading Robert's rules, it's right when you're adjourning the meeting that you make a decision on when we'll continue it.
Right. Yes. Okay. So I'll get Atul's feedback on that one. Okay, we'll look at 9.5, item 12. And it says, what correspondence requires the collective decision of the board? So I guess his point is that when we get correspondence, it is just that correspondence. It doesn't require any decision, so it would be then just taking that out, right? All correspondence requiring the collective decision of the board and which has yet to be decided by the board shall be tabled for the board's consideration and direction. We don't really do that, right? We don't.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Trustee Dort?
So we have a correspondence policy which takes care of that and explains what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and what should go in the agenda. So any correspondence received would follow the correspondence policy.
Yeah, I think it's just cleaning up the verbiage in that all correspondence requiring the collective decision of the board, but we don't really do that. It's just correspondence that qualifies under our correspondence policy, right? That gets added.
Yeah, can you?
So I think that's what he's saying is cleaning up the verbiage of that point.
Okay.
And again, we're just asking him to suggest, okay, come up with your suggestion. What do you want it to see? Trustee O'Brien?
I'd be happy to see that removed.
Okay, so we'll ask him to clarify that more. Notice of motions. So the notice of motion, recommendation that all notices of motion must be given in writing at the time the notice is made. Recommendation that the notice must be submitted in sufficient time that it can be printed on the agenda of the meeting where notice is given. One neighboring board requires submission 3 days before the meeting. One says before the meeting. One allows them to be presented at the meeting, but does not make it an action item until the third meeting after the notice. That's kind of interesting to wait that amount of time. So let's get opinions. Trustee Guzzo?
Mr. Chair?
Thank
yeah.
you, Mr. Thank you, Mr.
I'll put you
Chair.
in the queue, Chair Dewar, or sorry, Chair Dewar. I keep forgetting what I have to call you.
So
Okay.
I was reviewing this and I kind of understand the intent of this. However, one of the things we do have the ability to do is to upload the agenda packages at any time. And we know because we've seen that happen with correspondence or reports that have come in late. So I would like to see something like, notices of motion have to be handed in to staff, let's say just before the meeting in writing. And then the staff can, the agenda can be updated accordingly to allow public ability to see the notice of motion right away. So we have that capability. Because the way our bylaws right now, technically it does say that they have to be submitted and they have to be read out. Once it's there, it's considered read, even if we don't get to that item on the agenda. So it's supposed to be there. This way it'll avoid anybody asking and saying, I haven't seen that notice of motion. Can I see it? And that agenda is always there. And by it being submitted before the meeting starts, it can be distributed to all trustees. And in fact, that could be the caveat, like that could be what's required of it is to say, the notice of motion will be submitted to, if it's Director Daly, because technically he's the secretary of the board, and all trustees must be CC'd on it. But
Okay.
I don't agree with the adding it a further layer into having it in again on the Friday. And if it's not in on the Friday, if something comes up on the weekend, then potentially you could be waiting 3 weeks to give a notice of motion, which then means that that's not heard until later down the road. So.
Okay, thank you. Director Daly?
Maybe just an observation on the one board that says you present it at a meeting and then it comes up later. I think our discussion about not allowing motions on information, action motions on information and staff reports, that's when we do have information. So an information report's provided or a staff report's provided for trustee consideration, and then they do have information. I think sometimes when we get a notice of motion, so the notice comes, we do have the rationale behind it, then it comes to the board meeting, and we don't necessarily have all of the information that trustees may want to consider before making their decision. So that might be why there's that little bit of time lag there.
Okay, thank you. Trustee O'Brien?
Thank you, Chair. I like Trustee Guzzo's idea of even just before the meeting, as long as it's in writing and we can see it. And I hear Director Daly's thing about sometimes we don't get enough in the notes about what it is about. There's one more recommendation I wonder if you consider, and only because this, I believe, is in parliamentary procedure, is that the motion must be read. So I was wondering if we could make sure that before the adjournment, all motions are read. I believe we did that at the last meeting, and that just covers that it is officially read by the chair. And it would take as long as a prayer. I mean, if you have it right between the prayer and the adjournment, or before the prayer, even better, just so it's read and that business is taken care of.
Yeah, we'd have to ask Atul about that. Again, I think that brings up some challenges with not necessarily Robert's Rules of Order, but the way our bylaws are for sure. If we don't extend.
I guess my point is, how long will it take? And
yeah, no, I agree. It doesn't take long. It's just that it's, you're layering on, right, multiple things, and they're interconnected, and then it could impact other things. So before I go to you, Trustee O'Hearn-Ternalta and Trustee Duarte, can I get some opinion from other trustees regarding it must be read, meaning that we would have to then potentially, before our closing prayer, read the notice motion. So there could be other things left on the agenda which we don't get to, but we would have to read the notice of motions, and then we do the adjourning prayer. Can I get some opinions on that?
I'm good with that.
I agree.
I don't think it needs to be read if it's submitted in writing in advance. the point is once you've given the notice of motion, it's considered read, even if you don't get to it or not.
Okay. Trustee Agnew and Trustee O'Hearn-Tornado, do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion, but it's part of why I have my hand up, because I think the notice of motion should be handed in and we get it on the agenda. We don't wait to the night of the meeting. A notice of motion, if something needs to be amended because information's come forward, it can be amended at that time. So I think a notice of motion should be in our agenda packages ready for the meeting in description, full description, and then it can be read at the meeting.
Okay. And specifically, if we don't get to it at that point in the meeting and the meeting has not been extended, do you think it should be read? Or it should be just taken as read?
Taken as read.
Okay. And trustee, yeah, sorry, Trustee Duart.
I'd like to go back and say that the motion has to be handed in writing and as per our bylaws. And if the meeting gets over, I'd be okay if it's read, but at the same time, I'm not going to be sticky about it. It may not be read, so whatever.
Okay. Okay, Trustee Agnew?
Sorry, so what I was just going to say was actually when Trustee Duart was talking, I know he referenced as per what our bylaws say, but I think the whole point here is reviewing our bylaws. So I'm not ignoring our current bylaws, but I'm also not paying heed to them if they need to be changed. Yeah, I don't know that they need to be read. I think being submitted in advance would be sufficient time. So I would be okay with that recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. I don't think they necessarily have to be read. I think they have to be submitted or should be submitted before the meeting. So that means that we wouldn't allow notice of motions during the approval of the agenda. That's one point. And I guess, yeah, I like having it on the agenda before, but I guess as long as we have it before the meeting would be fine. So then really are we, maybe we can see if we have consensus. So the consensus would, sorry,
Mr. Chair,
go ahead. Trustee
can
O'Brien?
you just, and I'm okay with if we don't have it physically read. So, but could you just check with a tool to see if we don't have to have it physically read if it's written down? Maybe
Yep.
that's true. I just want to double check. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. We'll ask him that. So it sounds like we have consensus that the notice of motions must be given in writing before the meeting. And I'll just get confirmation from a tool that if they're accepted before the meeting, they're taken as read. Director Daly?
That might, if that's the case, then that might kind of counter the previous discussion we had about being able to make notices of motion during an information report or a staff report.
Yes, we would have to have that as an exception, and then it starts getting tricky, right? You're almost ruling by exception. Trustee Carabello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we just specifically talking about that notice of motion and the being read, or can I bring up another topic?
No, you can bring up another topic, but I was trying to just to condense it to see what
Yes.
we're going to ask a tool to verbiage on. But yeah, if you have another point, please go ahead.
I have like two things. One is about like the point of when it would be voted on, like we make a notice of motion, but maybe it can be up to the trustee of when they would like it voted on. If it doesn't necessarily have to go right to the next board meeting 2 weeks away, or if it's an issue that could be a month away, whether it can be up to the trustee to decide, up to like a minimum of 2 weeks and up to 8 weeks, let's say. I'm just wondering if that's even allowed or if that's possible for a question.
I think it is. Yeah, because what we would be saying is that you would put the notice of motion in before the meeting. So that's a good point. So let's clarify. I just assume if we're putting in the notice of motion before the meeting, we're changing the agenda before the meeting. there's a new agenda. That's not an amended agenda. So is that everybody else's understanding?
Correct.
Okay, so then the trustees aren't voting on the agenda as amended because it's a new agenda. And then in your notice of motion, Trustee Carabella, you could put to be discussed at whatever meeting, right? It doesn't have to
Oh, I
be
see.
at the next meeting. You just put your date in
Okay.
that you need.
That's interesting. Thank you.
And did you have another point?
Chair?
I did. Sometimes, like, well, I know with my motion I've put before that, I might be referring to something and I would like to include information about the motion in the agenda. Is that, possible or not? Like, that's another question. So the way that our reports are prepared now, we get an action item from staff and staff has a report and then they include things we need to know, like an appendix, right? And so is that a possibility for trustees too? It would be to further explain the rationale or, refer to something that then the public or the other trustees would have access to. And just, yeah.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
that's
that be
a
explanatory
good.
notes? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Well,
so I think you're talking about
listen.
explanatory, but instead of saying you're, whereas, you're actually putting in your notice of motion, and here is, the supporting documentation that supports my position. I don't know. We'll ask that question. I don't know if you can do that or not. So
Okay.
add information attached to note.
Yeah, so sometimes I've referred to even like a ministry document in the motion, particular like the parental consent motion. So is that something that I would have been able to attach as an appendix, the actual Anti-Racism Act, right?
Yeah, because we do it for motions that come from staff, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Director Daly?
Yeah, with all due respect, and please don't take this in the wrong way, we do
I
it
won't. I
with
understand.
motions from staff because staff have some expertise in certain areas. So we do try and bring that expertise, and we're trained to do that, and we bring what we can forward to trustees. So I think that might be a difference in some areas, not all areas. We're not experts on everything, but that's part of what we're paid for.
Okay, I'll ask that of a tool and see what the feedback is. Do we have? Did I get everybody? Is Trustee Dewar?
Yeah, so I like the idea, and we should submit our notices of motion in writing. Can I put it across to trustees and find out if the explanatory notes to be provided at the same time? That would be really great. You have the explanatory notes and the notice of motion. The notice of motion goes to the agenda, but not the explanatory notes. So just want to put it out to trustees if they are of the opinion that the explanatory notes need to be submitted. And that would save a lot of work to everybody.
Okay, Trustee Guzzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. With all due respect, and I always hate saying with all due respect, my explanatory notes, because they usually coincide with my opening remarks and whatnot, I usually spend a lot of time on them. So I think that it could potentially be onerous. It's not required right now. So I'd have an issue with that.
Okay, does anybody else have an opinion on that?
I would concur with Trustee Guzzo, and also I find that you put out a motion or a notice of motion, and then you hear back from people, the community, and you hear their concerns or their questions, and you're able to address that in the explanatory notes. Because what you think is explanatory sometimes isn't. So, you can get more feedback.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have opinion on that?
I would say it would be lovely to get those explanatory notes on that day. But I do hear Trustee Guzzo and Trustee Carabella's points, and I can go with that too.
Okay. Anybody else? Does anybody else have an opinion on that? Oh, okay. It doesn't sound like we have consensus on the explanatory notes. So what it seems like we have consensus on is that we want the notice of motion to be written before and handed in before the meeting in writing, which would then change the agenda for the meeting. Notices of motions then, unless we have an exception, as we previously discussed, would not be accepted during the meeting. So if that's the understanding, I can forward that off to Atul. Director Daly?
And this really is just a question, is there any reason why the notices of motion, and I get there's timing, but it could be submitted before the agenda is posted on Friday?
That's his second point, and it didn't seem that we had much traction on that. Okay. Do you, does anybody have opinion on it? I agree with that. I think it would be great if we can get them 2 or 3 days before. Trustee
I do as
Guzzo?
well. That's how my hand was up. Yeah, my hand was up. I didn't feel like I was going rogue, but I'm also stubborn at the same time. I'm trying to get clarification of why we don't want the notices of motion on the Friday before the meeting, so it's in the agenda package. It keeps it concise. I mean, as far as explanatory notes, it maybe can come on the day of the meeting, but I don't understand. I guess I need someone to help me to understand why we wouldn't want to do that.
I can offer, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, Trustee Guzzo, go ahead.
I would love to be able to do that in advance, but I'm not going to lie. Sometimes time is of the essence, and you know, I'm going to use myself. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. As much as I'd like to try it, if I couldn't, let's say for example, there's a meeting on Tuesday. If I can't get that in by this Friday, and it would be before Friday, right? Because the agenda has to be put together, so it'd actually be before Friday, so it would be Thursday. So I would have to have it in advance. If I missed that deadline, then the next board meeting I'd have to wait to get it to would be the first meeting in April, which then means my motion doesn't get on the table until the end of April. And I also work, and I think we all work other full-time jobs. I also chair policy, which requires work as well. It's not that I'm trying to be difficult by any means. Just for me, really, truthfully, it truly is a timing issue, and I can't always get it. All good intentions, but not always get it in time. That's my issue with it. Nothing else.
Thanks. Trustee O'Brien?
I withdraw.
Okay. Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also add to what Trustee Guzzo was saying that we get the agenda on Friday. So sometimes the motion comes from the information we're seeing on the Friday evening or over the weekend as we go through the agenda, and an idea can come up, or else we have that information in the package. So I would think that it's important to have that time of receiving the board package and then have the time until the meeting. And then Rosie could upload the written notice in the agenda.
Okay.
Or, as you said, distribute to staff and Director Daly.
Okay. Do we have anybody else? We might have to go to a vote on this when we seem split. Trustee Dewar?
So I like the idea of it being submitted on a Friday, but hearing Trustee Guzzo and Trustee Carabella, there's good points over there. So people can still submit their notices of motions before the meeting. Does it have to be in the package? It does not. It can be distributed. It can be read. So question here, does it have to be in the agenda package? Does it have to be uploaded? It can just be read.
Yeah. Director Daly?
Yeah, I would just suggest that we would want it posted on the agenda prior to the meeting so the public knows what's going to be discussed at the meeting as well.
So then I'll go with Friday, Mr. Chair.
So then that's what the first point we were talking about was before the meeting, and I guess we should put a time on that end of business Friday. Director
Yeah,
Bailey?
Well, just to suggest as well that, I mean, it's not difficult to re-upload the agenda. It's just a matter of when we want it done so that people can see it. So if trustees feel like Monday is sufficient time to upload it and that way public can see what's on the agenda, I mean, we can do that as well. It's really,
Okay.
I'm just kind of suggesting that people will want to know what's coming up on the agenda, I think.
Okay. Trustee Carabello, before I come to you, do we have a date that we would want? We said on the first point, it should be before the meeting. Do we want to put a date on that? End of business Friday, end of business Monday? That's a good point. Rosie mentioned the correspondence policy is the Monday before.
I would like that, Mr. Chair, at least the Monday, if not the Friday, the Monday.
Okay. So is that everybody okay with that? Do we have anybody objecting to that or opposed to that?
Okay.
I do. I oppose that.
Okay. Anybody else besides Trustee O'Hearn-Trinata?
Yeah,
I'm okay with
I would-
Monday.
Yeah, I would still like the Tuesday before the meeting. I don't know how it affects the other trustees. If they get it before the meeting, that's enough time. Because we're not voting on that issue at that meeting. So it's a notice of motion. And as Trustee Guzzo was saying, that life gets going, right? And we're preparing motions and we want them to be clear and well-written and well thought out. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So Trustee Carabello, you would like it on the Tuesday, the meeting, the day of the meeting before 5 o'clock or something along those lines?
Yeah, certainly not the Friday. Thank you.
Okay, so we seem to have more consensus on the Monday, so I'll just go around and ask if we have consensus that it's Monday or the day of the meeting on Tuesday. So yes would be for the Monday and no would be the Tuesday at 5. Trustee Agnew?
Yes.
Trustee Guzzo?
For Monday, correct? Yes.
Yeah. Trustee Carabello?
I'm for Tuesday.
Okay. Trustee O'Brien?
I'm going to go for Monday.
Okay. Trustee O'Hearn-Trinata?
I was going to abstain, but I don't agree with abstaining, so I'm good with the Monday.
No, you're not allowed abstaining. We had that discussion already.
I'm good with the Monday.
Trustee Duart?
Yes, Monday.
Okay, the Monday. Okay, so it seems like Monday, end of business Monday would be the date. Okay, so then yeah, so then that negates the next recommendation that it's put on the agenda, because obviously put on the agenda before it's circulated, because we don't have time then obviously for that. So that recommendation becomes moot. Okay, so we're on to, what time is it? 8, we have 7 minutes left. On to motions. Recommendation that the bylaw place specific parameters around questions asked by trustees, such as limit on time for any trustee to ask questions. This one I like. I think this is.
Chair.
So when you watch, if you ever watch the Parliament, you have question period where specifically you ask your questions, then you have debate, which I like because it's quite clear. You ask your questions, which informs or formulates your debate, which is separate. But anyway, this is putting a limit on times. Chair Duart?
Yes, I love this one. So the thing is, we can also, if you have a lot of questions, we can also ask staff questions informally too and get clarifications here. So I don't see a reason why we need too much time and wasting everybody's time at the board table. We ask good questions here, but clarifications can be asked on the side too. So I love this one. Thank you.
Okay, I'm disoriented on my speakers list, so it's either Trustee O'Brien or Trustee Guzzo.
Go ahead, Trustee Guzzo.
All right, you can, oh, okay. I was just going to say, I think Tim was before me, sorry, Trustee O'Brien, but I like the idea of having some sort of structure, and I like the idea that we do question period first and then enter into debate, and then it's done. And then once everybody's had their opportunity, and I think it's everybody, you go through everybody to, and maybe I'm talking about going even more structured, which is, and I think that's how Toronto does it, is they go through every single trustee. They have an opportunity to enter into, like, to give debate on their position, and then it's done and the vote is called. And that's it.
Okay, and would you limit question period to either a certain amount of time per trustee or a certain number of questions?
I think time. I think time would probably be, because then what it'll do is because we don't need to ask the same questions over and over again. And, you know, if you work cooperatively with your fellow trustees, you can all make sure that, you know, you hit the range of questions that you want to ask. But I think limiting to question, if I have 3 minutes, I might have, like, you know, 2 questions that take only 2 seconds, or I might have 1 question that takes 3 minutes. So I would prefer it that it's a time limit.
Okay, Trustee O'Brien?
Okay, I'm going to be the bad guy here. I like the way 10.3 is written as is. I feel we've never given it a chance. Opener gets 5 minutes to open up. Everybody gets 3 minutes, questions, debate, whatever you want to do. And that includes the answer of the staff. You get 3 minutes to close, and then we vote. I think that would really make you want to think carefully about what questions you're going to ask and make your points concise. That's just me.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee O'Hearn-Chernotta.
Thank you. I just have, and maybe Trustee Murphy, you can help me understand. My reading of the second recommendation, prevent trustees from asking questions to other trustees other than to the mover of a main motion who may reply at the time they close. So what is that saying? To ask the question to the mover of a motion, but they don't answer the question till at the end?
Yes, they could, or yeah, I guess what it's trying to do is to stop crosstalk and cross debate. Mm-hmm. You know, it's trying to stop a conversation from happening. So I think that's what the point is. Actually, yeah, I probably should have read through more of those points because there's a bit of context for all of it. So the other one is consider the same parameters that are used to ask questions of delegations, right? Which we have 2 questions, 3 minutes. Consider a time limit for total debate and questions on any one motion. This may be extended by a majority vote. TCDSB has a limit of 30 minutes, which can be extended twice for 15 minutes. So all of that kind of relates to the asking of questions and some of the options on how you can handle questions.
But to Trustee O'Brien's point, and he won't be the bad guy, I'll be the bad woman. You know, we have the time limits now because let's face it, we're all human beings and you know, we try to put a peg in a hole and we're trying to ask questions, but then you get into a debate. So if we just give people a time limit, whatever that may be, and let them use that time limit how they desire, but we have to be firm on those time limits because sometimes they're enforced, sometimes they're not. It's not a criticism. It's just a natural human nature. And I've never been a chair, so I know how hard that must be. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it. We just have to enforce it.
Yeah, so we don't have a limit on questions. You can ask questions till the cows come home. We have a limit on debate, but you can literally ask questions. If they are relevant and they're new questions, you literally can ask questions for hours.
But see, that's a tough one because as a trustee, we want to make an informed decision. So if we have to ask questions to get our clarity, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I would suggest that if there's that many questions, then it really needs to be postponed to another time till we either get more information or there's more time to discuss it. You know, which it's unfortunate we don't use that as a tool. You know, we make decisions or try to make decisions right away, but sometimes the best thing is to delay it till you get more information, and then you could have debate on another day. So, yeah, but right now there's no, so the question is, do we limit question time? Do we segregate it to its own question period? Those are some of the ideas that are put forward. Yeah, Trustee Dort?
No, you finish your statement. Sorry, I interrupted.
I'm honestly, I'm just rambling, so it really doesn't matter.
So, so I love the idea of time. So I'm just wondering what the structure of what Robert's rules specifies. So you have a motion which is read, then you have the question period, as Trustee Guzzo said, and then debate. Correct? Is that what Robert's rules prescribes the sequence?
That's a good question. I think it gives suggestion on that. I think it states that it should be divided. I think it suggests an individual should divide his questions from their debate.
So that,
but we could probably get more clarification on that. We're over our. Sorry, go ahead.
I like the idea of time for questions, but here we need to clarify whether during the question period of time is going to use to amend the motion. Are we going to allow the question time to amend the motion and say postpone or whatever? Or are we going to wait for the debate part or wait after the debate to make those changes? We need to clarify that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because an amendment can come at any point in time, so we need to clarify. Are we using question period for that? Are we using the debate part for that?
But Trustee Murphy,
honestly, I think it would be difficult for us to segregate question period from debate. I think it's a great theory, and I would love to see it happen, but I don't think, we don't have that tradition or history, whereas in Parliament it does, right? So it might be a bit more challenging. We're at our time limit, so respecting our staff's time, we've been here all day and it's a long day for them. We'll have to wrap this meeting up. We've got some points that I can bring back to Atul. I'll ask him a little more clarification around this time question and what Robert's rules suggest, and then we can pick it up from there the next meeting. I think we don't have anything scheduled for April, right, Rosie? I think we'll have to schedule a meeting for April. We'll put together a survey and get some times of what's available. I know it gets challenging. We're all on a lot of committees as it is, and it gets quite difficult to schedule. So we'll try and pick something that's far enough out that hopefully people can rearrange their schedules. I appreciate your participation and your enthusiasm for these. And if you think I'm stalling till I find my closing prayer, that's exactly what I'm doing. Because now I found my closing prayer. So please join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, we started this meeting with you and we are closing it with you. Thank you for this opportunity to virtually meet together. Thank you for the good discussions we had and for making this meeting a success. We would not have done it without you because many of our plans, no, there's a typo. Sorry, there's a typo in this prayer. But it is with you we establish them. Many things we have discussed today stir our hearts, and may we put them into action. May what we've discussed impact our lives, our families, our friends, and the rest of the world positively. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your participation.